This is the first of 6 ethics training modules for Texas educators. Module 1 will focus on teacher and student personal boundaries. Every good training has a direct purpose. Today, our purpose is to become familiar with ethical behavior and expectations for all Texas educators. More importantly, the purpose of this training is to create an awareness of teacher and student boundaries that should never be crossed. As we prepare to begin our training session, this is the overarching essential question that we will conceptualize today. Please respond to the essential question while you wait for the training session to begin. You may use the Module 1 note-taking section on your own paper to record your responses. Our training objectives will be directly tied to our training assessment. Today, we will help you determine what constitutes professional boundaries between a teacher and a student, understand the consequences of personal boundary violations, and discuss developing positive relationships and professionally communicating and connecting with students. What is happening in the area of educator-student boundaries? If you read the news or watch TV, you may have seen some of these headlines. It is a disturbing trend that is at its highest level ever nationwide. These are crimes being committed against our students in record numbers. Inappropriate student-teacher relationships in Texas kept going up in 2015 and has continued over the last several years. Texas teacher's student seen in sex tape to appear on Dr. Phil. Teacher charged says she fell in love with 15-year-old student. Teacher-student sex rampant in Texas. Lawmakers seek solutions. Being the top news story of the day should never be for this reason. This former Texas high school teacher was added to the most wanted list after she was caught with a 17-year-old student during a traffic stop. This is the same student with whom she previously pleaded guilty to have had sexual relations with. She was released from jail on probation in January of that year after being convicted for having sexual relationships with the students. She violated probation when she was caught with the teenager soon after her jail release. A warrant was issued for her arrest, but at the time, her whereabouts were unknown. What is happening in our schools? Unfortunately, Texas has not fared well in ethical violations. There has been a 41% increase in cases in less than 6 months. As you can see longitudinally, the number of open cases continue to rise in the state of Texas. These statistics account for all cases under investigation, including inappropriate relationship cases. If only it was as easy as that, and if only everyone was known for having common sense. So, what is happening in our profession? Why are we seeing more cases each year? Think about that and write a reflection on your own paper. How are we going to make the changes necessary to stop educators from having improper relationships with students? We can impact this disturbing trend by ensuring that all Texas educators are aware of the issues, receive training, and comply with district policies regarding ethical conduct toward students. We must maintain the dignity of the profession, respect and obey the law, demonstrate personal integrity, and exemplify honesty. Let's start with parameters as they relate to professional boundaries. In a recent study, the term professional boundaries was defined as Parameters that describe the limits of a relationship where one person entrusts his or her welfare and safety to a professional and often in circumstances where a power imbalance might exist. One of the most significant aspects of the teaching profession is the professional relationship between teachers and students. When we talk about educator-student relationships, it is important to note that the relationship is not equal. Educators are in a unique position of trust, authority, and influence with their students, which means that there is always an inherent power imbalance between teachers and students. Why is the educator-student relationship not equal? The relationship between an educator and a student could also be viewed as a power relationship. Educators have more power than imagined. Not only do they shape minds and guide learning, they also have the power to impact a student emotionally, mentally, and physically. The educator-student relationship is definitely not equal. There are different types of boundaries that we need to discuss in reference to the educator-student relationships. Emotional, relationship, and communication. While this is not an inclusive list, the majority of boundary violations fall within these categories. These boundary violations include emotional, relationship, and communication. The first type of boundary violation relates to emotional aspects of the educator-student relationship. How many of you believe this statement to be true? Teachers do not have favorites in their classrooms. While this seems innocent enough, it can lead to a boundary violation where the educator-student relationship is compromised. Many students come to school with an emotional need to connect and with an adult. There are two types of relationships with students, a professional relationship and a personal relationship. It is critical for educators to focus on developing a professional relationship that does not cross a personal boundary. When crossing lines emotionally with a student, you begin to slide down a slippery slope. The second type of boundary violation pertains to inappropriate relationships with students. This boundary violation is the most life-changing for all involved. How many of you have read in a newspaper, seen on television, or personally know a teacher who has had an inappropriate relationship with a student? As you can see, most of us have seen examples of this type of boundary violation. We should take note of the consequences that follow from such action. When discussing intimate relationship with students, this includes both current and former students. Intimate behavior includes physical, emotional, or mental interactions with a student. Meeting a student alone outside of school without a valid context is seen as a relationship violation. The third type of boundary violation relates to the area of communication. In the 21st century, communication violations are extremely common due to the prevalence of technological advancements. Social media is a term we throw around frequently. When you think about social media, what does the term mean to you? We know that social media involves online communication that can result in communication violations. Module 2 will provide in-depth information on communication via social media. While it's important to avoid all three types of boundary violations, the focus of this module is on relationship boundary violations. Which of these boundary violations do you think occurs most commonly in our schools? And also, why do you think this module focuses on this boundary and not on the others? The overwhelming majority of educators in Texas exercise their professional responsibility with care and conviction. The few who breach their duties, however, undermine the profession and leave a trail of devastation, particularly for students who become victims. As discussed earlier, it is important to note that not all cases begin with the intention to cross boundaries. Here's that slippery slope again. Sliding down that slope creates life-changing ramifications for the student and the educator. The definition of sexual misconduct includes sexual acts with the student, romantic acts with the student, erotic contact with the student, verbal, nonverbal, written or electronic communication of romantic or sexual misconduct, physical activity designed to establish a romantic or sexual relationship. As an educator, you must be aware if and when a relationship shifts to serving the needs of the adult and not the needs of the student. There may be an increase in the frequency of interaction, as well as an increased level of intimacy, which may lead to a sexual relationship. The lines become blurred. The blurred lines help foster inappropriate actions and educator misconduct. On the other end of the spectrum, there are educators who intentionally seek out students and groom them for the purpose of engaging in sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct can include any act or conduct directed toward or with the student of a romantic or sexual nature, regardless of the age of the student, including sexual acts, romantic acts, erotic contact with the student, verbal, nonverbal, written, or electronic communication of a romantic or sexual nature, or physical activity designed to establish a romantic or sexual relationship. This is the opening paragraph from a statement that a student provided the Texas Education Agency Division of Educator Investigations. When you read a statement like this from a student, it goes against everything that we as educators stand for and believe. For the most part, educators are heroes and role models, not predators. The student's pain is very evident. Sexual grooming is a term that is associated with intentional actions that result in sexual misconduct between educators and students. It involves finding a vulnerable student and engaging in inappropriate boundary invasions. The following slides provide examples of look-fors related to each phase of the grooming process. As each phase is discussed, think back to the video scenario we just discussed. Phase one of the grooming process begins with picking a student. When predators are looking for a student to victimize, they often look for families under stress, students not close to their parents, or someone with low self esteem or a lack of self confidence. Predators often choose students with special needs, depressed or anxious students, or even students who have been previously victimized. They often make the student feel like they are going to save them. They become the confidant and friend to the student. Often, students who are assigned to in school suspension are picked as possible victims. The predators often provide extra coaching and extra tutoring. They seek the trust of the family first. Phase two involves engaging with the student in student like behaviors. The predator is more involved with the student than with peers. He or she hangs out with the student and engages in activities that attract younger kids, like video games or student based interests. Phase three is desensitizing the student to touch. The boundaries become blurred between appropriate and inappropriate touching. There's teasing and joking around. There's accidental touching. Touch becomes a common practice and is seen as a loving and caring gesture on the part of the educator. Think back to the touching that occurred in the video scenario. Phase four is isolating the student. Usually there's private coaching, tutoring, and even providing transportation for school and non-school sponsored events. The student might stay overnight at the teacher's house. Sometimes the educator hires the student for babysitting, housekeeping, and yard maintenance. Many cases have involved camping or overnight trips. The last phase of grooming is when the adult makes the child feel responsible. The adult makes the student think he or she will get in trouble if anyone finds out. The adult stresses that people would not believe the student. This phase is especially effective if alcohol, drugs, or pornography is involved. So what guidelines look like at a campus, and we have to look at those. On your campus, are the expectations clear regarding educator-student relationships? If so, what are they? Are they formally presented and in written form? Is there any room for confusion or misunderstanding? We have discussed the negative impact of crossing boundaries with students. We have talked about inappropriate relationships between educators and students. Now let's stop for a moment and consider the importance of this quote. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. We cannot and will not downplay the importance of strong relationships between students and educators. To ensure great academic success, a school system must have educators who care about and relate to their students. How can we support our students and still remain within the ethical boundaries is the question. It sounds easy, yet we continue to have ethical violations. As a rule of thumb, consider the three indicators that can help you determine if an action is an ethical violation. Number one, is it transparent for all to see? Number two, is it approved by my supervisor? Number three, does it occur during this regular school day or at a school approved activity? If so, most likely it is not an ethical violation. Educators are responsible for their behavior at all times. There are so many students who need a positive educator in their life. For some, the educator will be the only role model around. Are you up for the challenge? Let's see what skills are necessary to build a supportive relationship. Educators must possess a skill that provides the opportunity to build a supportive relationship with students. The supportive relationship will foster good attendance, good grades, and even good behavior. A few essential skills are listening, guiding, praising, correcting, respecting, honoring, disciplining, teaching effectively. We owe that to our students and the communities we serve. It is why we chose this honorable profession. It is important to follow guidelines as specified in the district policy. If you're alone with the student, the door must remain open. Social media exchanges include personal emails, Facebook posts, tweets, and any other form of social media interaction between you and your students. Don't have physical contact with your students. Do correct and teach your students. Keep your hands and other body parts to yourself. Remember to refer students to the appropriate person for counseling and or other discussion about personal matters. Always maintain a professional boundary between you and your students. You are the adult, the educator, and the professional. Act like the expert at all times. Most of all, avoid putting yourself in a position where you have to defend, explain, or justify your behavior or actions. Take a few minutes to complete the performance task in the paper that have for yourself and answer the question, what would you do? Read and review scenarios that have been presented in this information. Use the information that was just presented to you regarding strategies to maintain professional boundaries. Think about the boundary between your space and your student space. If you have any questions about the material and the information that was presented during this module, please email your HR director for more information.